Advanced Algebra Chapter 8 Lesson 5, and we want to look at solving exponential equations and solving logarithmic equations. And again, I'm going to introduce just a pre-calculus video that we've worked on in solving these equations. The first video will be a discussion of kind of the theory behind solving exponentials and logarithmic equations. I'll then do a video where I'll do a number of examples solving both exponential and logarithmic equations. Chapter 3, Lesson 5 of Pre-Calculus, we're going to look at solving equations and modeling using logarithms that we've been working with over the last couple of lessons. In this video, we'll talk about how to solve an exponential and logarithmic equation, and then we'll do a video where I will do a number of examples, and then we'll look at some applications of those moving forward. Now, before we go into this, I want to go back and discuss something that we discussed when we introduced logarithms, and that is, what is our method, or how do we solve equations? So let me point out a couple things. So let's say if we have 3x plus 7 is equal to 14, let's say. Now there's a couple things that we do when we're solving equations. The first thing that we do is we determine where the variable is that we're solving for, that we're trying to determine the value. So I notice that here's the x, and that's what I'm solving for. So the first thing that I do, make sure you make a note of this, the first thing that we always do is we isolate this term that has the variable. That's always been our first step. We move everything to the other side so that the term that we're solving for, the variable that has that term, or the term that has that variable, excuse me, is all by itself. So we do that by doing inverse operations. So we add the 7 or subtract the 7 over here. Once the term that we're solving for is by itself, we then, as a last step, secondly, we undo this final operation. So this is multiplication. So to undo that multiplication, we divide by the exact same value, because in doing so that undoes that operation, and it gives us the value then of the variable. So there's two things that we've always done when we're solving equations. The first thing that we do is we isolate the term that has the variable that we're solving for. And then the second thing that we do is we do the inverse operation then to determine the value of the variable. Now I want you to keep those two things in mind as we're looking at these, because we're going to solve these exponential equations and these logarithmic equations in the exact same way. We're going to look for and find the variable that we're solving for, and we're going to isolate that term. Once that term is by itself, it's either going to be an exponential term or a logarithmic term. And we talked about these being inverses of each other. So to solve the exponential equation, we're going to isolate the exponential term, and then to undo that exponential operation, we're going to do a logarithm, or take the logarithm, because that undoes it. If we isolate the term and it's a logarithmic expression, then we're going to undo that by doing the inverse, by changing it into an exponential. Okay, so that in essence is how you solve these equations. So it's remembering how we solve equations, and then remembering simply that an exponential undoes a logarithm, and a logarithm undoes an exponential. So that really is all there is to it. So what we'll do now, actually I'm going to wrap this video up with that discussion, and then in the next video I'll do a number of examples like we did in the last video, and you can watch as many as you need. I'll do some easy ones, I'll do some difficult ones. So we'll do some exponential equations, and then we'll do some logarithmic equations.